Hello, welcome to another broadcast with Digital Photo Mentor. Sorry, I was sleeping at the switch because I was playing with this fun image of a giraffe. For today's photo editing live, we have a special event. So today I'm working on images from the Prairie region of photographic arts, and I wanted to put that on the screen so I make sure I said it right. So all the images that you're going to see today are from members. So if this is your image, I'm going to be working on this among a few others. So let me get started here. I'm just going to switch over to my branding here, and let me get started. I'll be right back in the photo editing software to show you this demonstration. Okay, give me a second here to just organize my desktop. So I know that many of the members that have submitted images, I asked a question about what software you were using, and I got a lot of Photoshop, older versions, some Lightroom older versions, some On One, and a few other things. So today, for the purposes of demonstrating, I'm going to use what I use most often in my workflow, which is Lightroom is my primary editing and archiving software. So that's where you see the images now. And then I'm also going to pull a few over into Luminar. Excuse me while I turn off my AC. That should give us a little bit quieter environment. Sorry about that. So I'm going to use Lightroom, and I've selected a few of the images that you've submitted that I can work on. So what I'm looking for in terms of images is things that I can demonstrate different techniques for you in terms of not all the same. So not all landscapes, not all macro, that kind of thing, and maybe a few black and white. So the reason that I chose the first few that I did is that each of those are from a different person. So I wanted to make sure you all got a chance to have your image chosen. And let's just see how many I can get through today. So I'm going to pop over here. There's a bunch of comments. So awesome, everybody. Linton here from South Australia, right? So we have this new comment system, which is great because I can feature our favorites. People that are here all the time. Holly is often with us as well. Lewis, great. You're with the photography group. Welcome. Okay, so I think I have one of your images. Marguerite, wonderful. All right, so yes, great that you got here live, Holly. And this is our new weekday time because everybody's busy on the weekend in the summer. So I'm hoping more people can tune in. All right, so without further ado, you're going to see me looking over here because my Lightroom is on this other monitor. But if you have any questions, do pop them into the chat here. And if you want to put either a question mark or the word question or something at the beginning, and then Rob is in the chat moderating for me as well. So if you have a question or something that comes up, then I will feature that question and answer it at the appropriate moment. So if you have a question about a particular image while it's on the screen, do ask me about that and just put something at the beginning so I know you've asked about the bird, for example. Okay, so let me get in here. So this one I've actually already edited, and I want to show you the before. Okay, so this is what the image looked like originally, and this is by, actually this is yours, Lewis. So is it Lewis or Lois? Lois. Okay, so this is your image, Lois. And what I did here was I just did some tone control. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I did that. And I worked in here. I've got my little green pointer so you can see where my mouse is. Look at the little green circle moving. Okay, so that's where my mouse is. And you should be able to see what I'm doing with the controls here. So if you're using Photoshop RAW, Adobe Camera Raw, you would see these same sort of sliders in the raw processing, okay? So all I did here was I boosted the exposure a little bit. I turned the highlights down to bring the highlights down here. But then what I did was I used a bunch of radial filters, okay? So radial filters are what is called a local adjustment, right? So the sliders in the main area are global adjustments. They apply to the entire image, and radial filters and things like that, adjustment brush or a graduated filter, only apply to part of the image, okay? So I'm using the radial filters, which are a circle or an oval, and I've applied them to certain parts of the image. So when I highlight one here, you can see that this one is applying outside of the bird, and I've done minus 100 on the highlights and minus exposure. Then I've done one on the inside to affect the bird, and I've increased the exposure. I've brought the highlights down because I found it was clipping a little bit on his neck. Okay? And then I raised the shadows a little bit, and I also brought the whites and the blacks down, but I brought texture and clarity up. So I want increased texture on the bird's feathers. Okay? I'm going to take this to an extreme, and then I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. Okay? So I'm going to turn these radial filters off and on. So watch the bird's feathers so you can see that I'm brightening him, right? But I'm also bringing out the texture in his feathers, right? Because if I lower this, you can see what that's doing on his feathers. It's doing a really nice job. And the same with the clarity. Okay, so I don't want to increase clarity or sharpness or texture on the background because I want that to be that nice bokeh that's already there. Okay. So then I did one more radial filter on his head just to brighten him a little bit more, but still to make sure that that highlight is not clipping. Right now, if you're not sure if the highlights are clipping or not, just click J on the keyboard. Okay, so J is a shortcut and it turns it on the histogram. If you're not used to looking at the histogram while you're working, definitely turn it on in whatever software you're using because you want to be able to see where the tones fall. Okay, so on the left-hand side is black and on the right-hand side is pure white. In the middle is gray. So all this is telling me is that I have lots of tones which are dark and middle and then a little bit of tones which are light. If I undo this lowering of the highlights on this particular radial filter on his head, and if I lower it on this one, right, you can see what it's doing on the background. But watch what happens with this one. Like when I turn this up and the white's back up, his neck was clipping, right? So see where the red shows up here? Right? Wherever it's red, you see the highlights are clipping. That means it's off the edge of the graph and you're not getting any detail in that white area. Okay. So what I did, just undo that, is I lowered the whites and the highlights until I didn't see any of that clipping anymore. Can you see that? Whoops. Wrong button. Try that again. There we go. So J key for clipping. Now, if you're using the sliders, you can also hold the Alt Option key down while you're clicking the slider. Okay, so for example, if I drag the white slider up, you'll start to see where it's clipping in those areas that you're seeing white. Okay, so I want to make sure I don't get any of that clipping. So all of that was done as tone control to make sure that the bird stands out more than the background, because right now he's sort of backlit. And all of that was done as tone control. I also added a little edge vignette, and that's down in the effects tool in Lightroom. If you're using something else, and again, in Adobe Camera Raw, you'll find the vignette, okay? And all that's doing is just adding a little bit of darkness to the edge. And I'll show you a little trick for applying the vignette. If you turn the feather all the way down to 0 and make the amount quite strong. So here I'm at minus 49. You'll be able to see the outline of where the vignette is. Okay. Now the disadvantage of the Lightroom vignette is that you can't off-center it. Okay. I can change the size of it using this midpoint slider or the shape of it, but I can't offset it. So if you need an offset vignette, that's where you need to use that radial filter like I did earlier. So I will dial it down to 0 feather, get the position and the sizing where I want, then put the feather back up over 50 and adjust it. Okay. You want to make sure that you don't end up with a vignette that looks like this. Okay. You don't want something that is obviously vignetted. Okay. You want to darken the edges just so that it draws the viewer's eye in ever so slightly, but you don't notice it. Okay. So let's take a look at that image. Let's try that again. Let's take a look at that image just without any of the controls. Okay, so what I did there was I pressed L, which is lights out. So before and after. And that's about all I would do for this little guy, right? The other thing I did was I cropped it slightly. If I undo the crop here, he's fairly centered in the middle of the image. So all I did was I cropped in, keeping the same aspect ratio. Okay, so you can either lock it here or just hold your shift key when you're cropping. I just brought it in a little bit so that he's a bit more off-centered, and want to make sure I keep his tail. Don't crop his tail off, like so. Let me pop back over here and see if there's any questions. These are good questions. So Rob wants to know if you could just pop in the chat. Are you able to see the editing good enough, or would you like me to go to full screen like this? I don't know that it makes the editing screen any bigger. I can try it like that. Let me know your preference, and I can also take the logo off there so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so tell me in the chat if you prefer the full screen layout, or if you want to have it with me, if you want to be able to see me. Let's try that. Ron says he can see it okay. So you want to be able to see me so that I can wave at you while we're editing? Is that all right? I'm going to go full screen, and then when I come back to talk to you, I will put it back on. I'll put myself back on. All right. Let's move on to another one. So I hope that helps, Lois, and gives you an idea of what I would do with that particular image. So it's a very nice bird image. You did a great job taking it, and all it needs is a little bit of enhancement. So that's kind of a pet peeve of mine as well in terms of photo editing. When people talk about it, they often talk about fixing things, and I prefer to look at photo editing as an enhancement as opposed to a fix, right? So the images I've chosen are pretty good images. They're well exposed for the most part, in a sharp focus, and they just need a little bit of boost with processing. So here's another one by Ron. So I hope that's you, Ron, that I can see in the chat. All right. So what I'm going to do with this one is, the first thing I notice is that it's a little bit crooked. So I can fix that a couple of different ways in Lightroom. The crop tool has an auto. If you click auto, it's going to try and correct that. So see how it changed the rotation of the image a little bit, okay? So you can do that. I'm just actually going to undo that. Or you can go down to transform and choose level. Okay, see how it did the same thing? It just rotated it a bit. If I choose auto, it's going to try and correct vertical distortions as well. Right? So it's a very slight difference, but it's just it's a subtle change, but makes things look a little straighter. Okay. I often like to use the crop tool just to check as well. Okay, so it did a nice job of straightening, but I want to check the horizon and the verticals. So when you click on the outside of the crop tool, you get these sort of guides here. And I'm looking at, I'm going to go a little farther with it. So I'm looking at the verticals of the building as well as the horizon, okay? Like so. The other thing I want to do is crop a little bit from the bottom, right? The reason that I'm doing that is when you have a lot of foreground in front of your subject, it feels like it's a lot farther away, okay? So I'm just taking a little bit off there. I love that you got the moon in here. That's awesome, right? Now, let me just put up the information here. Okay, so we can see the exposure information at the top here. And it looks like it was shot with a Canon R. Okay, so mirrorless camera. And with that, Photoshop should, and it does, recognize the camera. Okay, so what I do often is I will change this profile here. Okay, so if you're using Luminar, there's a way to find that as well, and that's in the light panel. And what you can do is click on these 4 little squares. So it's at the top of the basic panel in Lightroom. Okay, if you're using an older version, You may not have this. It was in a different place historically, but it's probably in another location, and it may not find your camera if it's a new camera, okay? So this one is got 6 matching camera profiles. Now, as I move over each of these, look at the image, how it changes. Okay, so look at landscape, okay? So if I choose landscape, it's going to give me a much more vibrant image right out of the gate before I even punch any contrast or saturation. So I'm going to change the camera profile, right? And let's see the difference, okay? So it's already more pink and colorful. The other thing I'm going to do is look at the histogram again. And one of the things I do is what's called setting the white and the black points, okay? So in here, I hold the shift key down and go to the white slider, but the word, okay? So I'm going to double click over the word, not the slider. And what it's going to do is it drags that white slider over to the right, okay? So you see that histogram popped over to the right until it's touching the edge of the graph. So what that means is it's setting the pure white point so that the graph, the information on the graph, which was lighter, less than white, so darker than white, is now pure white, okay? Let me undo that. So watch the histogram as I do that, okay? Here we go. Pops that over, okay? Now see the difference that made in the contrast, right? I'm going to do the same with the blacks, okay? Now it moved it over a little bit. And then I'm going to use the Alt Option key with the slider to just check it, okay? So I'm going to go a little farther. And what I do is with the whites, I want no clipping. So I take it up till I have clipping and then just down till I have none. So about there, okay? Same thing with the blacks, but with the blacks, I actually want to go a little bit farther so that I do have clipping. And the reason for that is when you have blacks and pure black in your image, it will be much more saturated. Okay, look at the difference. Okay, so you'll notice that I have not touched the saturation slider here at all. All I've done is change the profile and set the white and the black points. Okay, I might scale that one back just a little bit. And I'm going to just punch the shadows up a little bit to bring that grass up. Okay. Now, this is a really fun, colorful image. Okay. So I could play with the white balance here. Okay. So I could dial it down to make it more blue, or I could dial it up to make it more warm. Okay. And because this is a raw file, you'll see that all of these presets that you'll see in your camera are also available. So I can use the white balance as it was shot, or I can choose daylight, or I can choose something like cloud or shade, which gives it a warmer tint. So I'm actually going to choose daylight. That looked like a good starting point. And I might even give it a little bit more magenta. Okay. Just bring that up a little bit. Okay, so you can really play with these to make it warmer or cooler, depending on the look that you want, right? I think it was better as shot. Sometimes I'll play with auto just to see what it does. That's not bad as well. It gave it a warmer look. But I think the way it was shot is actually pretty good. So I'm just going to give it a bit more yellow. And then I'm going to play with the colors with a different tool. I'm going to give it a little bit of clarity. And I'm going to give it a tiny bit of texture. But again, I don't want to do a bunch of clarity and texture, because what happens is when you do that and you sharpen, it will apply to the sky as well. And you can often end up getting graininess or artifacts in your sky. So I tend to keep clarity around 10 to 15 and texture fairly low on the overall image. And then what I might do is a radial filter. Okay, so that's this guy up here again. And just double click the word effect to reset it. I'm going to go texture and clarity and just apply it onto this grain elevator. Okay, it's a very Saskatchewan image. I love it. Right, and I might do another one over on this portion here. Okay, so all I'm doing is applying texture and clarity just to the building. Okay, now let's say I want to do another one just on this moon here, but I don't want texture. Let's say I want contrast. Maybe I want to punch the whites up a little bit. And I'm using that J key, okay, because I don't have the ability of using that Alt Option key here. So I want to have some contrast in that moon. Maybe let's give them some dehaze. Okay, so now what's happening is it's applying outside the moon, and I just want to apply it on the moon. So that's not really what I want. So we can use a little range mask at the bottom here. Okay, if you've never used this before, this is a great part of the tools inside of Lightroom, right? So I can then tell it, okay, I don't want to apply this to the dark tones of the image just by sliding this one up here. So you see that it's sort of taking that halo away, and it's just applying to the moon, like so. Right? So if I turn these on and off, you can see what it's doing to the building. So that's got a nice effect. But the thing that I want to do here is to go down to the HSL panel. Again, if you're using Luminar, you'll be in the color panel to find this. And I'm going to demonstrate a couple of Luminar edits as well. Okay, so in the HSL panel, that stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. Okay, so saturation allows me to adjust the saturation of different colors independently, as well as their brightness. Okay, hue adjusts the actual tint. So let's play with hue for a minute. There's a little thing here called a targeted adjustment tool. Okay, see if I hover my mouse over it, it tells me what it does. So when I click it, and I get this little, see where my mouse is, I get this little crosshairs and an up and down arrow. What happens is when I click on the image, if I choose this blue here, and then I hold my mouse button down as I drag, watch the sliders as though it's changing the hue or color of just that tone, right? It's not affecting the rest of the image. If I want to do this tone down here, right, that's more blue. So I can get more purple. So I don't want to make funky colors, but let's say I want to darken the sky a little bit, and then I want to darken this part. Okay, so that works to my advantage here. But let's say I want to lighten the grass. Now I can go up to lighten the grass. Now you'll notice that grass has a lot of yellow in it. Okay, so as I'm dragging up, the building is lightening as well. Okay, so you'll find that grass is not just green, it's mostly yellow, surprisingly. Okay, so I can bring that up to even highlight that building even more. Okay, we can play with the purples and magentas to see what those are doing. There's a bit of that in the sky. Okay, and really play around with our tones here. Okay, now I find that the saturation is too high up here, so I'm just going to lower the saturation of that a little bit. So it's a dance. Okay? Editing is often a dance of make one adjustment and then go back and edit the one that you just made. And then I'm going to make that a little more blue, like so. So let's see what that HSL sliders are doing. So it's really affecting the sky and helping that building to stand out even more. Okay? Let me just pop back over here. Do we have any questions here? All right. So exoskeleton 9000 said, is this Lightroom? Yes, this is the current version of Lightroom Classic, right? Rob says it's a Lightroom CC. Actually, that's not correct. It's Lightroom Classic. Okay, Lightroom Cloud or Lightroom without anything in it anymore. Adobe is confusing with their names and their nomenclature. Lightroom without anything is the cloud version. This is Lightroom Classic. All right. Linton wants to know, would this be good for a black and white conversion? It could be, yeah, because there's lots of different tonality in here, so we could certainly give that a try. Good suggestion. Let's hit the black and white and see what happens. Okay, so when you use the black and white treatment here, make sure you're on Adobe Monochrome because you want to be able to go down here. So remember where we had HSL a minute ago, now it says black and white. We still have this little targeted tool, but all the color sliders are still there. So you might wonder, well, what the heck? There's no color. Well, there is, because the original image, Lightroom still knows what's there. So watch what happens when I use that tool and I drag it down. Okay, so I'm going to go to extreme just so you can see. Look, it's dragging the blue and the aqua sliders, so it's really affecting the sky. Okay, if I want to brighten this building, we can do that. And we can bring the grass up. Okay, let's say I want to darken the grass and I want to darken the sky and make it really dramatic. Okay, something like that. So you want to be careful of going too far, right? And too far looks like something like this. And this is another question that that came up on when I asked questions about what you were struggling with. You want to make sure, see how there's this little fine outline on here, right? There's a little white line there. See if I turn that off, you're seeing a little white outline. That's often what happens when you go too far, okay? The other thing that it could be is in here under lens corrections. Okay, so it could be a chromatic aberration. And I'm going to turn that off just to see if we can see it. Let's just see. I'm going to go back to color for a moment here. I don't see a chromatic aberration. So what chromatic aberration looks like is it looks like a color fringe or outline around the image. Oh, there's a very slight one, okay? And it's really, really minute here. I'd have to really try hard to look for it. But sometimes when the colors, what chromatic aberration is the red, green, and blue light are not perfectly aligned by your lens, and you get this color fringe, and it's usually just a tick box, okay? So in Lightroom, it's under the lens corrections, and in Luminar, it's under optics, okay? So that wasn't the issue. So I think it's just pulling those sliders too far. Okay, so you really want to be careful of going too far. I could bring the highlights down a little bit and see if that helps as well. So yes, we certainly could make a really nice black and white out of this. I personally like the color version because I think it's really punchy. And for Linton, this is really a prairie. This is iconic prairie image. And a lot of our members watching are in the prairie region group. So another great example of things you would see in Saskatchewan, for example, right? All right. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to keep going. All right. So that was Ron's image. The next one up is an image from Larry. Now, this one I chose because I think there's a lot of potential here. And I'm curious if Larry's watching, if you've edited this one yourself. Kelly says she loves this shot. I agree. This is a fantastic image, and I see a lot of potential here. So that's why I've chosen that. Right. Oh, Stan. Stan lives about 10 miles from Sovereign. All right. This is the one I meant to highlight. There we go. All right. So yes, it's a fabulous image. So we are going to edit this one. The first thing that I want to do is I'm going to crop it a little bit because it looks like maybe it was shot at an old junkyard or something. Okay. So what I do is I always look at the edge of the image, and there's some other cars here. Right. And I see another one if I go way over the other side over here. Okay, and that one looks like a new car, maybe in a parking lot. So I'm going to crop this a little bit from the right, and I'm going to go freeform. Okay, so you don't have to stick with the same proportion that your camera took the image in. Okay, the aspect ratio, especially if you're just sharing on social media or what have you. Okay, if you want to keep the original aspect ratio, make sure it says original, and then you can just drag it in. That if I hold my shift key down, it won't reshape it, okay? So I can come in a little bit, maybe a little bit off the bottom. And I'm not going to take anything off that left side because I want space for the car to sort of face, okay? So whenever you have a subject that is facing one direction, you want to generally have space in front of it or her or him, so that they have direction to look and move into, even a car, okay? So I want to have more direction, more space over here. So this car we can deal with in another way, okay? The next thing I want to do actually is check my tilt on here. I'm just going to reset this momentarily. So another way I can set the check to see if the image is tilted, I'm looking at the horizon here, okay? There's this little ruler here in Lightroom, and if you click on it, it pops off and it gives you this tool. So when I click on the front part, it gives me this line. So I'm holding, and I'm just going to try and line it up over here with the horizon over here. And when I let go, it's going to use that line to straighten the image. Okay, see how that worked? Bada bing, bada boom, just like that. All right. That's better. Okay, so now we're straight and we've got a little more cropping. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is look at those camera profiles again. And this was a Canon 5D Mark III. I had that camera. Okay, so great camera, great lens, right? Excellent shot. F11 looks great. So they've chosen landscape. If I look at faithful, neutral, standard, probably landscape was the best choice here. So I'm going to leave it on that. But you can also go and look at any of the artistic ones. Okay, so they come with Photoshop and Lightroom. Okay, so you can just hover over these and you can see that you get a very different look, something that is sort of antique. But I'm going to do that another way, okay? Because the image here is begging for a sepia, I think. Okay, so what I'm going to do is those double click on the whites and the blacks again to set my white and the black points. And this one, I'm going to take the whites up a little higher because even though there's a little bit clipping, you'll notice that it's just on the chrome and the headlight. Okay, so I'm okay with that. And the same as if you have like the sun in your picture, if the sun is clipping, that is perfectly acceptable and actually ideal. Okay, I'm going to bring the exposure up a tiny bit because I'm looking at the car itself. And then I'm going to bring the highlights, which is going to affect the sky a tiny bit as well. Right? Now, I'm going to pop over into Luminar because I know a lot of people are using Luminar and show you what I'm going to do with this one. So what I'm going to do is right-click it. There's a few different ways to open up your image. So I'm using Luminar as a plugin for Lightroom. Right, so you can see that I also have Aurora, some On One, some Topaz. Okay, so you can choose Edit In and then open it in the program. Or you can open it in Photoshop and then apply it as a smart object, which takes a little bit longer, but is completely non-destructive and you can go back again and again. Or with Luminar, you can actually export and open the original source file, which is the raw file. Okay, so if I was going to do that, I would actually just pop over to Luminar, right? Because I actually have that image over here, right? So I can just open it, and this is what the standalone version of Luminar looks like, okay? Let me go in here and just turn off these bottom guys. There we go. So I've got a few different things that I created as templates in Luminar. Okay, so in Lightroom, they're called presets, and those are things that apply a predetermined set of settings to your image. And in Luminar, they're called templates. Okay, so I created these for portraits. Okay, but they work really well on other images. Okay, so this is a very different look than I had in mind. So I call this one Ghoulish Grunge. It's kind of a blue template look, but I think it works well for this image as well. Another one that might work that I have is called Antique Touch, which is a sepia look. And I'll show you how to create some of these things inside of here. Okay, so when you apply these, you can also scale them down. Okay, so if I just want this look, but I only want it sort of lowered, I can just lower it like so. Okay, but I'm going to start from the beginning. So I'm going to go back to my history here and just undo, because I want to show you what Luminar is capable of with some of the AI tools. Okay, so the very first one, so if you're new to Luminar, all the tools are in this tool panel here over on the right, and they're segmented or sectioned off into Essentials, Creative, which is pink, Portrait, which is yellow, and then these professional ones at the bottom, which are green. Okay, so I'm going to start with the Essentials, and the very first one is Enhance AI. So watch what happens when I do this Accent AI one. So it does all kinds of things. It punches contrast, it increases structure and sharpness, and overall, look what it's doing, right? It's doing a great, great job, right? Sky Enhancer is smart enough to know where the sky is, and it's doing things like, imagine you had a polarizing filter on your camera, okay? So look at the sky, and it's doing a fabulous job of that, okay? So with 2 sliders in here, I get that. Isn't that wonderful? So one of the reasons I really love Luminar is that it's really super quick and easy and intuitive, okay? Maybe you could speak about it, Holly, because I know you are a Luminar fan as well. So I'm going to do the composition again. And I find with Luminar, if you press this composition AI button, the purple one, it gives you a suggestion. Okay, so it's telling me, oh, I think the image is cropped perfectly. Right? So I'm actually just going to crop it freeform and do what I did over in Lightroom, and just maybe a little bit from the bottom as well, like so. Okay. Now there's another tool under their light panel, which is, you'll see that is very similar to what we saw in the basic panel in Lightroom. You've got blacks, whites, highlights, and shadows, and contrast. But you've got something called smart contrast, right? As I drag up the smart contrast, it does a nice job of maintaining detail in different areas. So I use this one a lot, and I'm probably going to bring it up to about 29 or 30, okay? There is also a curve built into Luminar, as there is in Lightroom. And I haven't shared any images or any articles with you yet, but Rob, maybe you could share the article on curves that I did recently, and a demonstration on curves for everybody. And there was Holly's quote about Luminar. Okay, so I'm going to go down to vignette. Okay, so like you saw me add a vignette in Lightroom, okay, I can do the same here. So I'm going to make it dark. I'm going to make the feather 0. So I have the same thing here where I can see it. Okay, I'm going to make it smaller so it fits the car. Now I'm going to go even smaller just to show you what the beautiful thing about this is. There is a choose subject button. Okay, so remember how I said the Lightroom vignette can't be repositioned? Well, guess what? This one can. Okay, so I can put this vignette wherever I want. Okay, so I can make it smaller. And that's why I like to do this 0 feather trick. Okay, position it where I want it and I really get it in on the subject. And then I can put the feather back up and the darkness back up a little bit. Okay, I can also brighten the center at the same time. Okay, so while I'm darkening the outside, I'm brightening the inside. Let me just toggle that off. Okay, so see what that vignette is doing, and it's really drawing your eye into that truck. All right. Another one that I'm going to use here is Structure AI. So structure is similar to something like Clarity and Lightroom. Okay, so you can see that as I pull that up, and I'm going to take it to massive extremes here, right? We're getting this really sort of cool grunge effect, okay? But I don't necessarily want it on the grass or the sky because I want to focus in on this truck. So I'm actually going to leave it way up high here just for now, and I'm going to mask it. So this is another beautiful thing about Luminar is all of these tools, okay, with the exception of the light panel, because those are basic raw editing tools. I'm going to mask this one. So they all come with masking, okay? So if I wanted to mask the enhanced filter, I could. But I want to mask the structure one, okay? So you click this little button here. It looks like a kind of a marker. So when you open that, you can paint it in or erase it. Okay, so I'm going to choose to paint, and I'm going to paint onto the truck. And as soon as I click, okay, it allows me to set the softness of the brush as well. Okay, so you want a brush that has a wide softness area, because what will happen is then it will be gradated more. Okay, so you won't just get a hard edge on your painting. Okay, let me show you what happens when I do it without that. Okay, let me go to 0 softness. Okay, so if I just paint like that, okay, you can see where I painted, right? You see the edge of that? Okay, so we certainly don't want that. So I'm going to go back up here. I almost always leave the softness way up high. Okay, you'll also notice that as soon as I clicked on here, let's just do one click, okay, it disappears everywhere, and now it's only applying there. Okay, so where you see the red. Okay, so I'm just going to paint in. So as I click, you'll see the mask appearing, and Luminar does that for you automatically, so you can see where you're painting, okay? And let's just get that one over there. Okay, so now I've painted that in on the truck only. Oops. Okay, so that's off and on. So let me see if I want to dial that down a little bit, because I applied this to the maximum, right? And I often do that, the same idea with the vignette. So I applied it liberally so that I can see where it is, and then I'm going to scale it back a little bit. All right. So don't be afraid to go to extremes with things and then come back to the middle, because you'll never know what's possible unless you go that far, right? If you go the opposite way with structure, you'll notice that it blurs things, okay? So it's very, very similar to clarity, but it takes it to like the next level, right? I really like this tool in here, right? So now I'm gonna do one last trick in here with the mask open, as I'm gonna just click this little 3 dots and copy the mask, and you'll see why in a moment. Because I want to go into details, which is like the sharpening panel in Luminar. Okay, I'm going to add some sharpness. I'm going to add medium details. Now, medium details, I love this tool because, again, it's similar to sharpness and clarity, but it allows you to get more specific as to where you want these things to apply, right? So this is medium details at 100. Watch what happens if I do large details at 100. It looks different, right? Versus small details to 100. Okay, so everything on here, let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. Okay, so that's small details to 100. You could see like every tiny little thing. If you were having this on a person's picture, you'd see all the pores and everything, right? Which is not ideal. If I go medium details, right, see how that's different? So it's looking for areas which are larger and smoother, right, when I'm doing large details. So I usually keep my large details somewhere around 15. I like medium details about 30, and I usually keep small fairly low. Okay. Now, again, if I want to take this to extremes, just to see what happens, okay, I can apply the same mask. So I open the mask and then just paste it. So now what's happening is it's applying this same mask that I did earlier with structure. Okay, so I can use that same mask over and over again, and I don't have to paint it every single time. So that's brilliant. All right, so I'm not going to take that quite so far. All right, so let's take a look at a before and after. So we're creating something that's really cool and grunge-like, right? I think I'm going to increase that vignette a little bit more. So there's that dance again that I mentioned, right? So the dance again is, you know, do one effect, come back, and readjust. And I want to get this grass darker. So that's why I'm repositioning this mask. I might even make it smaller, like so. Because I just want to keep this area bright, and I don't want to brighten the grass. All right, that's good. Put my feather back up like so. That's better. I'm going to darken the grass another way as well, right? All right. Now, sky AI is something that you would want to use for sky replacement. I'm going to do that on the giraffe image in a moment. Right? But you also have augmented sky in here. So I could choose to add some birds, for example, if I wanted to. Okay, so when it adds the objects to the sky, we can position them. I can resize them, right? So I can choose to place it. But you'll notice that as I do this, right, you can see that it's behind the car, right, the birds. You'll notice that as I move it out, more birds are going to show up. Okay, so see the birds there? But when I put it here, the program is smart enough to know that the car is there and it puts the birds behind them. So I find that's a really cool feature. So I'm going to put it over here just to add some birds in the sky. It takes a minute to catch up to me here. And let's see, I'm going to defocus them a little bit. Right? Because they should be sort of flying in the distance. I want them a little bit out of focus. And let's do mask refinement, which should sort of fade them out a little bit. Okay? Just adds a little something in the background. All right. So Rob has shared the article for curves, right? You can find that there to learn a little bit more about curves, right? And yes, the mask feature is amazing, right? I use it all the time. Now I notice here that there's a kind of a blob in the sky here. So I'm going to use the erase tool real quick. And the erase tool in Luminar is great. It's literally, I just color over the thing that I want to erase. And once it catches up to me here, work with me. There we go. Come on. And then click erase and it will erase that little dot. So it's possible that you've got a dust spot or something on your sensor or on your lens. So make sure when you're shooting that you clean both of those things, right? Okay, how are we looking so far? I'm not reading my private chat, Rob says. All right, he says, the consensus is to have me on the screen. Okay, so I will go back here then. You guys want to see me? Here I am. And yes, we have a live stream that I'm doing right now every Wednesday, okay? So every Wednesday during the summer at 8 p.m. Eastern time, I will be editing images submitted by followers and readers. And today we're doing all images from the Prairie Region Photographic Arts Camera Club groups. All right, so let me continue now that you can see me. And I'm wearing my orange shirt, right, in solidarity with the Indigenous people who are having a bit of a hard time with recent events. So just supporting them. Another one of my favorite tools in Luminar is down at the bottom under the professional tools, right? And it's called Super Contrast. Now this one is really neat because again, you can adjust the contrast in the highlights, midtones, or the shadows. And I don't know anything else that does that. I find that often if I pull the highlights down and it's not getting the detail that I want, I can grab it with this. So look what happens when I bring that midtone contrast up. The balance slider allows you to adjust it, whether it's going darker or brighter, right? Applying to the midtones only. So let's say I want to go a little bit darker, right? Like so. And then let's say I want some more highlight contrast, but I want to, okay, see how it's brightening highlights only, darkening highlights only. So I might darken the highlights a little bit. And let's say we want the shadows. I'm going to deepen those as well. So it gives you a way to really control the contrast independently. Let me turn that off so you can see what it's doing. Okay, so before, after, right? See what that is doing, and it's giving me control over where I'm doing it. Now I'm going to go back up to the top and play with the color a little bit, because what I'm finding is with all of these adjustments, I'm getting too much saturation on the blue. So remember I mentioned that HSL panel in Lightroom. The same thing is here in Luminar. I don't have the targeted tool. I hope that's something that they implement, but I know that I want to lower the saturation of the blues a little bit, okay? Because the sky has gone a little bit too oversaturated for my liking. I want to keep that a bit more realistic. Okay. And I also want to darken the grass. So remember I said I wanted to do that a different way, back to that luminance again. Okay, so remember green is going to darken the grass, but also yellow. Okay, so notice how the yellow actually took the grass more darker than the green did. Or you can do something like this where you kind of split it, right? So then you get more contrast in the grass. So I'm lowering the greens and brightening the yellows, or we could try it the other way. Okay, brightening the greens and darkening the yellows. But I kind of like it. I kind of like this. Okay, so I'm really bringing some darkness into the grass. So look what that is doing with the sky. Let's turn that off. So off and on. Okay, so it's doing a really nice job on the sky and the grass. And then, of course, we could also play with the orange, which is going to affect that truck most likely. Okay, a little bit. But there's also orange in the grass, right? So if I want to bring that rust out a bit more, I can pump up the orange. And I can also saturate it if I want, okay? So these are also really handy for skin tones, because regardless of the skin color of the person that you are photographing, I find that most everybody has a combination of yellow, orange, and red in their skin tones, right? And you can really adjust the color of the skin. You can give them a bit more color if they're pale, or just pump up the skin tone using luminance and saturation of those three colors, right? So I like what's happening there. Now I'm going to add to, we're really going with something dramatic here. So guess what? There is a tool called Dramatic in Luminar, and I love it. Okay, so let's take it to extreme, okay, and you'll see what it does. Under the advanced tabs here, it's lowering the saturation a bit. So I'm going to put that back to 0. So what it does is it gives you, again, more of that sort of grunge look. And you have some sliders that you can play around with. I find that if I keep the amount low and the local contrast high, I get something that's really kind of cool. Right? So now we're getting somewhere. I'm liking what's happening here. There we go. And the beautiful thing is all of these are non-destructive, right? I can turn each of these filters off, or I can undo them with this back arrow here at any time, okay? Let's see. Another one that's a favorite of mine is mood. And this is one that's going to apply what's called a LUT. So you can't do this kind of thing in Lightroom. If you have Photoshop, you can apply a LUT, but it's also more complicated. So a LUT is literally just like a cinematic grading. And I'm going to turn the amount up here so that you can see as I move my mouse over these, you should be able to see the color applying to the image. So I'm just hovering over, and I think I know which one I want because I use these a lot. Okay, so I'm just going to hover over one that I think might look good. Okay, so I use this one called Wooden quite a bit, and another one called Smoky. Okay, let's see what Smoky looks like. Okay, so Smoky kind of gives it more of an old antique look, as does Wooden. So notice that Wooden is sort of minimizing the sky and the color in the sky. So that's kind of cool. Okay, sepia. Oh, red trace is cool. I think I'm going to go with the Wooden. Okay. Then I have the option of lowering the saturation of the filter itself. Okay, the LUT, increasing the amount. And again, I could also mask it if I wanted to just apply this to the car. Okay, so let's see what happens if I paste in my little mask. Got the spinning wheel. All right, paste. So we should see it disappear from the grass. Okay, so now it's applying only to the car, and I'm not so crazy about that. So I'm actually going to undo the mask. I'm just going to undo what I just did, right? Because I liked what it was doing on the sky a great deal. I'm going to fill the mask. There we go. Okay, so I like what's happening there. And I'm just going to tweak it a little bit so it has a bit more of a sepia tone. And that's under the toning panel. If you're using Lightroom, they've now changed what it is. It's called color grading now. And you can do it in the highlights, shadows, and midtones, right? In Luminar, it's called toning. So I'm going to do the shadows. You have to drag the saturation up before you can see anything happening. And then I'm just going to find like a yellowish kind of tone, like a sepia again, somewhere up around 50. Okay. And I might do like blue to the highlights so we can create what's called a split tone. Okay, so if I got blue up here, right, and then I can change the amount and the balance and so on. Okay, so I can go more towards the blue or more towards the sepia. Okay. Like so. All right, what does everybody think of that so far? Now I could keep going. But I think this is a pretty good edit for this image, right? So if we look at the before and after again, oops, where's my mouse button? I have to actually be in Luminar when I press the button. Okay, so before, right? A great image to begin with. There's lots of potential there. We just have to pull it out and massage it a little bit, okay? Now the birds are sort of a personal preference thing. But I think they add something to that background, and we could even go farther and minimize some of those cars in the background if we wanted to as well. And if I wanted to go farther with the grass and darken it a bit more, there's a dodge and burn tool, right, which you can use to lighten or darken. Just make sure that you are using it below 15, okay? Because I find that this is a tool where you need to be really gentle with it, okay, and layer it in, okay? So I'm just going to paint down here and maybe even a little on the bumper, and you'll see it takes a minute to catch up, right? And I might do over here just to kind of minimize that car, maybe even in the sky, and minimize the stuff in the background. Yeah, you see it catching up to me, right? And maybe even this a little bit here. So it gives you a really great tone control. And then if I want to lighten other areas, right? Like say, for example, I want to highlight this grill a little bit more, or I want to lighten the headlights to make them look like they are on. Right? Maybe I'll go a little bit more on the headlights like that. Like so. Right? Now you think it's not doing anything, but let me just dial this down once it catches up. Still catching up. I love the texture on this windshield here. It looks like it's, it's been aged for centuries sitting in this field. Right? So see what the dodge and burn tool is doing when I dial it down to 0. It's subtle, but it is working, right? And that's how I turn the headlights on there, right? So I think that is a fantastic edit. All right, let me hop back over here. I want to cover a lot more images, but I want to show you a few that I am not going to work on today. And I did a little bit of work on them ahead of time just to show you a few things here. Now this one, I'm going to zoom in. Okay, this is 200%. Okay, so this is an image by Gavin or Gavin. I'm not sure how I'm pronouncing your name. Right, so this one is really out of focus. And what I did was I pulled this one into Topaz Sharpen AI. If you could share the link to that, Rob, I've got an article and a video on Sharpen AI. I'm not demonstrating that one live because it's really, really computer labor intensive, and it takes like 5 minutes to process one image. Okay, but this is the software that can save images that are extremely out of focus if need be. I did something similar on this one of a horse that Norman sent in. So I just want to show you this one side by side because I did a bit of work on this one already. And let's just zoom in to 100%. Right, so the one on the left is the original, and then the one on the right is the one that I pulled into Topaz Sharpen. Okay, I actually did that one in Photoshop and applied Sharpen as a plugin in Photoshop. Right, and then I did a few other things. So let me go over here because you'll notice that I also removed the fence. Right, so that's the original. There's this little fence here. There's a red flag and a little dot in the sky. And in the finished version, I got rid of those. Okay, so I used a few of the different cloning tools to do that inside of Photoshop. When you have a major cloning job like that, it's the best to go into Photoshop, right? So let me just open this one because, as I mentioned, I did this one in Photoshop. So I'm going to open this. Oops, make sure I get the right one. There we go. I'm going to open this one in Photoshop. And I want to edit the original because I've created a PSD file. So a Photoshop document is called a PSD, and it allows me to maintain the layers and anything that I've done inside of there so that when I open it up again, you'll see the filters that I applied. And because I did them as what's called a smart object, I applied Topaz as a smart object, okay? I could actually go back into the Sharpen filter, the Topaz Sharpen filter, and reapply it if I wanted to, okay? Now it's a large file. You can see that my Photoshop is still opening it, okay? And that's partly why I don't demonstrate the Topaz. It takes even longer, right? So it's a really resource intensive program. But it does one thing, and it does one thing really, really well, right? So what I want to show you is my layers here. So I'm working with 2 monitors, so I have my layers panel over on the other side. But what you can see here is if I go back to the original layer, okay, so that's what I started with. After I applied Sharpen, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. Okay, so you can see the original is the out of focus version. And the focus here looks like it was more on the snout of the horse's nose, right? So you want to be really careful when you're focusing that you put your focal point, your dot, on the eye of the subject if you're photographing something alive. If you could share that article, Rob, we've got an article on how to get sharper images, and this has to do with camera settings. There's also a free cheat sheet that you can download from there as well. Okay, so if you can share that, please, Rob, people can read up on that. And how you set your focus settings in your camera is going to make a big difference here. Okay, so let me turn this layer on, right? So you can see that I've applied the sharpen and it's now sharpened up the fur. You can also see that I masked it because I didn't want it to apply to the background, right? Then what I did on the final layer is I did a bunch of cloning, okay? So I'm going to pretend I don't have that layer and I'm just going to show you how I did that, okay? So what I'm going to do is create what's called a stamp layer. And what I did to get that is it's a combination of 4 keys, Command, Alt, Shift, E. So it created this layer here called layer 2, which is a stamp of these 2 below, okay? And I'm going to do the cloning on this layer. And I'll show you, I'm not going to do the whole thing, but I'll show you the process, okay? So there's a few different tools. And it looks like there's some stuff in the sky here as well, okay? So there's a few different tools in Photoshop that you can use. One is just the healing tool, right? So the healing tool you can set to normal or lighten or darken, and whatever you sort of paint over, Photoshop, oops, sorry, wrong healing tool, this one here, right? Whatever you paint over, Photoshop is just going to try and fill in, okay? So you see where I'm painting, I'm just doing the dots here, and it's using what's called, I'm using content aware fill. So it analyzes the bits around, and I can still see some spots in the sky here. So it analyzes the bits around the part you've highlighted. Now I'm going to try this on the red thing, but I'm going to guess it's not going to work so well, and you'll see why in a minute, right? Okay, so see, it didn't do good a job there because of the close proximity to the horse's mane, right? So what I used here is a different tool. I use one called the patch tool, and it looks like this. It looks like a patch you would iron on your pants, right? And then you draw around the thing you want to get rid of, okay? And it gives you this little marching ants. Then I'm click and drag it to another spot, and Photoshop's going to try and take from this spot and fill in this spot, okay? And you see it did a pretty good job. Kind of messed up a little bit here at the top of the mane, right? But I could probably just do another one of these. And this time, if I pull it over here, it's going to give me a better fill, perhaps, right? That's not bad. Okay, now you see that I'm getting sort of these 2 bumps on the mane here. If I want to smooth them out, I could actually do that and just match up the line of the mane of the horse, so it should fill it in nicely. Okay, that looks better. I could probably keep playing with that a little bit, but I think for our purposes, that looks pretty good. Okay, so I'm trying to match up the lines here as best as I can. That's probably not going to do a good job. Yeah, I made a bit of a mess there. That's not bad. Okay, now we come to deal with this. We could also deal with this hair, right? If we want to remove the hair. Again, we could probably use this for most of it. So I find that when you're dealing with something like that, it's best to do it little by little. And I find that this one works better. So this is the one where you're going to need to find, you have to set a clone point, okay? So you have to hold your Alt Option key down to set the target. So I click next to the line, and then I'm just gonna sort of paint up. So it should fill in. And what I recommend is to change where your target is, because you don't want to paint exactly right next to it. Yeah, see, now I've gotten something that doesn't look good. So I'll just undo that. So I'm going to paint from further over. So I'm cloning from further over and healing a different spot. Right? I can try and get rid of this spot as well. And then once you get close to the eye, you might have to use a different tool or go from a different spot. Okay. Let's see, how are we doing here? So I'm going right next to it, down like so. And then when you do this part here, make sure that you get the same thing. Make sure you get it lining up, right? Like that. You can sort of almost see a preview of it with the tool, like that. And I want to try to do the same here, okay? So just move it over. Yeah, that one was not so good. So undo. Okay. Command or Control Z or Z is your friend. Right. So you want to undo those things. And I would probably even zoom in a little bit more and use a smaller brush too. Right. So when you are removing things like this, it's really a process of do a little bit. Don't try and do the whole thing at once. Sample from different areas, right? Because you want to make it look like it's filling. I'm going to turn my little green cursor thing off here so you can see better where my painting thing is. Okay, here we go. Okay, so then I'm just get the rest of it there. And one more. Okay, so that's not bad. All right, so I would probably, again, go in a little bit finer and do a better job in here. But for the sake of time, right, that's doing a pretty good job. And what I did down here with the fence is the same thing. Okay, so I used the patch tool and I did big chunks of it like this, right? Like so. And then make sure you sample from a different area. Okay, so it doesn't always feel the same. Because if you repeat a pattern again and again, it's going to look like it's been cloned. Okay, so I'm choosing from over there. Okay, then we're getting in his whiskers. So I want to be careful here. And you can still see that it's in the whiskers, but what I'm going to do is sample this area and then come up here where there's another whisker. Okay, so we'll see what happens and what it does. Okay, that's not bad. You know, it's not perfect, but I can also go in and try and do something with this tool and see if it does a better job here, filling that in, right? I can just try a few different combinations of things, okay? So now I've kind of gotten rid of his whiskers, which is not ideal. So once you get into an area like that, you want to be really careful and just make sure that you are not making it look unrealistic, right? Like so. Now the other thing that I can do is change the blend mode of this filter or this tool to lighten. Okay, so when I'm using it over here, it doesn't accidentally grab something darker and it only fills in areas that are lighter. Okay, so let me go back here. So I'm not going to do that whole thing again. I'm just going to show you. There's my finished one. And that's one's got the hair. Okay, so you could keep going and finish the hair. And the other one, I did the whole fence and this little spot in the background. Right. So then when you're done working in Photoshop, all you do is you hit save. Okay, because I opened it from Lightroom, because the two work together, then I just need to hit save and close, and it brings that image back into Lightroom with the new changes. Okay. Any question about that? Okay, so Gavin says the Luminar sharpening is really impressive compared to past experience with Lightroom and Photoshop. Yeah, if you watch my video of comparing different sharpening methods, I compared Lightroom, Luminar, and Topaz, as well as Photoshop. And Topaz Sharpen did win, but I would say second was Luminar. So if you don't have Topaz Sharpen and you don't want to spend the money just for that, if you have Luminar, by all means, do that. Rob, maybe if you could just pop in our link to buy Luminar or to do our 5-day challenge. I noticed that a lot of you are not using or haven't used Luminar. So we have a 5-day challenge on our website to test it out. And what happens is when you do that and you sign up for it, you get a new video every day, a new tutorial with a specific lesson with one of my images. So you get to edit my image, which is fair because I'm editing your images. So you get my image every day and a lesson to go with that image. And then you can see as well, you get to download a trial of Luminar and see if you like it. All right. You have more patience than I do, Darlene. Kelly says, thanks, Kelly. This is years and years of editing. Like I go way back to the days of, I used to do my retouching on negatives and prints with a tiny little brush. And in fact, I didn't wear glasses before I did that. So I was doing such fine detail work. I used to work on, like when I had entered prints into the PPOC competition, I would spend upwards of 6 to 8 hours on one print. right? And keep in mind that was the days of print. So I had to do that on every single print I made. So that's the URL, and maybe Rob can pop that in the chat as well if you've got the URL he's done. So you can should be able to click on that in the chat and get right to that article. Rob likes your profile, Gavin. Now I need to go back and see his profile photo. It is a good profile photo. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to take a little break here because I think we're going to probably go a full 2 hours today. It's getting a little warm in my office. So I'm going to leave you with just a little quick countdown here, and pop in the chat. Just let me know what you're learning. If you've learned something so far, I've got about 4 more images that I want to show you, 4 or 5 more images, actually quite a few. I want to do the giraffe next because I promised the giraffe. So Gavin, you're up next. Grab a beverage, cold beverage, or an adult beverage if you want. And I will be back in a couple of minutes. So Holly just said she's melting. And as you just heard, my air conditioner was on for like 3 minutes because I think it's about 28 degrees in my office right now. So what happens when the timer runs out, Rob, is I press it again. All right, Stan says, I think I need to get Luminar. I think you do too, Stan. I would highly recommend it. So part of the reason why I love Luminar, there's a number of reasons, and I'm a Luminar ambassador. If I think you're in the insiders group as well, Holly, and if you downloaded the ebook that I just wrote, or I wrote a chapter for Skylum on portraits, and not just portrait editing, but taking them as well. And if you are a Skylum insider member, you can get access to that ebook for free. But one of the reasons, or several of the reasons I like Luminar is, number one, it's a one-time purchase, so you don't have to pay the monthly fees to Adobe. Number two, it's affordable. It's under 99 bucks. Oh, give them their, we need our code for that. I need a new banner. Code. I'm going to put this in here for you guys on the fly. If you use this code, you will get $10 off. I'm trying to spell and my brain is melting. You will get $10 off when you purchase Luminar. So let me just get this one off here. Okay, so there we go. So there's a discount code. So if you do decide that you want to go and buy Luminar, then that is the discount code to grab it. Let me put that on here again. And that place to buy it is digitalphotomentor.com. I spell my own website.com/Luminar. Is it -AI, Rob, or just AI? I think it was, let's see, I think it's -AI. I'm just going to double check my own spelling here. There we go. That should do the trick. Double check. All right. Let me see what other comments we had coming in here. Coffee, yes. Kelly had to run. Thanks for joining, Kelly. We'll see you next time. Great. Marguerite loves the grain elevator with the moon. Yeah, that was a great shot for sure. I love it. Okay. Gavin's profile pic is by Hans Koldkamp. Nice. Thank you for giving your photographer credit. All right. And by all means, listen to Holly. Make sure you buy Luminar AI because Luminar 4 is the older version. I do believe they still sell it, but Luminar AI is the one that you want because it has the sky replacement. Okay, so I'm going to show the sky replacement on the giraffe image, which I believe is Gavin's. Yes, so we're doing that next. Okay, there we go. Is that all right if I just leave that at the bottom? Then you can watch me edit. That should be fine. While we go here, okay. I'm going to go back to Luminar because the giraffe image, right? One of the questions when you sent this image was you asked about dull or boring skies. And that is definitely something that we can work with inside of Luminar, right? Let me just close Photoshop here so I'm not getting too many apps open at once. All right, so you'll notice that I've already played with your giraffe image a little bit. And all I did here was apply the template. So again, these are templates that I created for portraits, and one of them is called, I believe, Sunset Magic or something like that. And Sunset Magic, yes, okay. And then what I'm going to do is just turn off some of the portrait tools because I don't think the giraffe needs any skin smoothing. And I'm going to play around with this sky, right? So the sky adjustment and replacement is not something that you can do in Lightroom. Photoshop does now have it in their new neural filters, and I've tried both, and I actually find that Luminar's is better, okay? So this guy here may not be the most appropriate one. I'm going to see if I can find another one. This is from my sky pack. So I do have a set of, how many sky packs do we have? 24 or something like that, Rob? If you could please share a link in the chat and I'll feature it in a moment to our sky pack. And I want to try a different sky. So when you're choosing a replacement sky, you want to make sure that you get one that fits the lighting direction. So let me turn my mouse pointer back on. The light is coming from here because you can see it on the front on the chest of the giraffe. So I want to make sure the light's coming from the right of this image. And Luminar allows you to flip it if your sky is not in the right place, right? It also allows you to move it side to side. So I'm just kind of resetting all of these settings here, right? So that's what that particular sky looks like. I don't know. I'm not crazy about that one either, to be honest. I think I might want something with a bit more blue sky. And I'm not sure if I have the right one for this image here, but let's try. That's not the right one either. It's really just about trial and error. If you don't have your own sky images, there's quite a few available. Like I said, my sky pack. I also recommend another one by Matt Seuss. He's got several, and I'm going to look in his because he's got a number of them. There's a lot that come with Skylum, but you want to use a sky that isn't you know, the same all the time, because if you're using the same sky over and over again and the same, you know, as other people, the ones that come with Luminar, all your images are going to start to look the same. Okay, that's looking a little better. Something with clouds, okay, because this light here is fairly diffused, right? I don't see a shadow of the giraffe, so I want to make sure that the clouds really match the lighting here. So I think I'm going to go with one of these. That's not bad. That fact matches the scale a little better as well. Right, now I've defocused the sky, which is another cool feature, because you want to take a look at the background here is out of focus, right? So if the ground is going out of focus, the sky, which is at infinity, is not going to be in focus, right? So when you do the replacement, Luminar allows you to just slightly defocus it, which is great. Okay, I'm actually going to make sure it's not too warm. You can change the warmth of the sky, right? I can make it more blue. I can make it darker. And the other thing that I did here was I actually rotated. You can rotate the sky because I find that the horizon here is a little bit crooked. So I made sure that when I applied it earlier, right? So I can just shift the horizon up a little bit so you'll be able to see it. Okay, now keep in mind that this is also a fairly labor-intensive thing on your computer. And what I'm looking for is the edge here of the sky matching up with the edge of the land. Okay, let's go a little farther, see if that works better. Nope, that's too far the other way. Okay, so see how that rotation, I'm just looking to, let's darken it so we can see it here. Okay, so see how I'm looking for the rotation of the sky to match the horizon. And then I make sure that it's blending in. Okay, so use the horizon blending. Okay, so that's going to make sure, again, like when I painted the brush, it's like the softening of the edge. Okay, so it's softening the edge of the sky when it applies it. Okay, I can move the sky side to side if I want, like so. Okay. Oops, sorry, that's up and down. My bad. I can move it side to side this way. Nope, that was up and down. Okay, let's move it a little bit that way. Okay, so see how the clouds are slowly moving? So I can play with the positioning so that they're not right behind his nose. That looks pretty good. And then the mask refinement sliders down here are important for making sure that you've got it blending in nicely. Okay, so we don't want to have a halo around anything. Okay, so I could play with the fixed details. Okay, I find that the closed gaps one often doesn't do as nice of a job. Global might do a job as well, meaning it's going to take over more of the global, cover more of the original image. Okay, so I could try that one. Let's just try that and see what happens. Okay. And I could also blend it more. Okay, so you can blend it even more. So now we're starting to get a nicer blend there. Okay, so see that? So the goal is we don't have a halo like so. They also have reflections. Okay, I don't have any water in here, but you can add reflections now in the water if you're using a sky replacement with Luminar. I'm just going to change that to 0 because we don't have any water. Okay, now our sky is blending really nicely. Look at that. Okay. Relight is also important here. Okay, so relight, what it does is it allows the sky image to blend better with the original image or vice versa. So it takes the sky image and says, okay, we want to relight the image to match the sky. Okay, so see how it's sort of changed it more blue and shifted it to darker. Okay, so now they look like they fit together better. Okay. Now I'm going to show you another trick. If I go back up to this enhance that I used, enhance AI that I used on the truck image, you'll notice that the sky enhancer has been applied. Okay, so even after I change the sky, you can still enhance it. Okay, and in this case, I actually don't want to enhance it. I like it with less contrast, so I'm going to dial that down. But I do want to enhance the whole image a little bit. That looks good. Okay, I noticed that the giraffe had a similar problem as the horse that we looked at earlier. In this one here, the focus is more on the grass in the foreground than it is on the giraffe. So it looks like the focus was oops, I lost Luminar. Give me a moment here to re-grab that. I'm going to check to see if we have any questions. Stan. Okay, Stan wants to know. I've got to turn my banner off here. There we go. Does the sky moving feature work on the original sky? No, it does not. It only works on the one that you're adding. Okay, so the idea is that you're replacing the original sky. There's also sky enhancements or sky augmentation, which if you want to add a cloud or something, you can add a cloud. So for example, if you have a plain blue sky, you can actually add some clouds to that. Okay. Let me see what's happening here. All right. Sorry, I've got to relaunch Luminar here. I lost it. There we go. All right. Getting back to our little giraffe here. Is there any other questions overall in terms of, I'd love to hear again, just put in the chat. I know I did the survey when you all sent in your images, and I've looked at that to see what everybody's using in terms of photo editing. But if you haven't done that survey and submitted images to me, just pop a note in the chat as to what is your primary editing software? What do you use? And are you happy with it? I would love to know that. All right. I've got this back again. Okay, so we're back with our giraffe. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is straighten that horizon a little bit again. And I should be able to just click this button here, which is helping me correct it, which did not work. So it's trying to correct the straightness of the giraffe up and down. So I'm just going to do it manually here because I want to check the horizon and it looks a little crooked. There we go. About like that. The other thing I want to do is I'm going to go free crop on here. Remember I talked about less space in front or less space behind and less space below the subject. So I'm going to give him a little more space to look into and less space behind him. I'm assuming him, I don't know, could be a her giraffe, right? The other thing I was going to show you with a trick in terms of sharpening. So we talked about sharpening earlier with Sharpen AI from Topaz. And if I do the same thing with small details, what I found is that it does a really nice job in here of sharpening things. Let me see if I can zoom into 200% even. All right, so what I'm looking for is I'm looking to see if it's enhancing this giraffe a little bit. Just take a moment for it to catch up to me here and apply. I'm going to sharpen it a little bit as well. Okay, so see how that's doing a really nice job? Look at that. We can see the texture in the fur even. Okay, so once again, I'm going to go back to fit to screen, and I'm going to use this mask tool, and I'm going to paint it into just the giraffe and the bit of the foreground. Okay, so here we go. Painting into the giraffe. And make sure that you paint like here as well, because anything that's on that same plane with the giraffe would also be sharp. Okay, I'm gonna just get rid of some of that in the middle here. Okay, like so. I know that's gone a little bit too far with the sharpening because I took it too far to see what it was doing, and I'm gonna scale it back just a bit. But I think that's done a really nice job in terms of sharpening the giraffe. And if I want to go a little bit less on the grass, which I think I do, I'm just going to sharpen the grass only a tiny bit. So I'm going to erase it actually 75% here. So I'm going to erase so it's only sharpening the grass a little bit. I want to keep that sharpness on the giraffe. And I would do a much better job of masking this and getting in closer. I would zoom into 100% or even 200% so that I'm not sharpening sort of the things outside of the giraffe like I am here. Okay, I would do a much better job of masking. But let me just zoom back in here again. Okay, this is at 100%. Let's wait for it to sharpen. I think it was Gavin that said that you like the sharpening inside of Luminar AI, right? Well, I'm just waiting for it to catch up on me here. And Margaret says, when using one of the skies provided by Luminar as a replacement, can I erase features from the sky you don't want? No, you can't. You could actually, if you went into the erase tool, I believe you could do that, but you can't. You could also mask it, but then you kind of end up with a hole in your sky, right? So you don't actually have the files for those sky images. But if you had your own sky images, or like any of mine, or like Matt Seuss's, for example, maybe give an article, share an article of Matt's that we did, Rob, or the one that I did where I shared his skies, because he's got sets of 400 as well. If you have the actual images for the sky, you can just copy that image and make a replacement, like edit whatever you want out of that sky. Okay, so let's take a look at this before and after now. Let's ignore that. Okay, let's go over here. Let's do that before and after. So see how the giraffe is much sharper now? Okay. And that is that details panel. So that does a really, really nice job. Right. I would probably add a vignette here again, maybe around the giraffe. I want to place it and make sure that I'm vignetting the giraffe. Let's go a little bit rounder and put it about there. So there we go. Okay, so now that is what you don't want to do with a vignette. Okay, you don't want to do that, right? You want to make sure it's nice and soft on the edges and not super obvious, right? Now I might go in here and play with the color again as well, because I could darken this grass. I can even change the color of the grass, right? If I want to make it more orange, right? Or green. Let's go a little more orange to match the giraffe. And I can then darken the grass. We've already darkened the greens. Let's darken the yellow as well. And then the giraffe is just going to stand out a little bit more. Okay. Now notice that, let's see if the giraffe is orange. Oh, there's orange in the grass. But if I lighten the luminance on the orange, the giraffe brightens up. Okay, so that's a good thing. Like so. And I think that's about all I would do with this image, right? So it's a fairly straightforward, like the sky was the only thing and a little bit of sharpening. I have added a little bit of a curve here. And if we want to play with curves, an S curve, if you push up on the sort of the part on the right and down on the part on the left, you make an S shape and it adds contrast. Okay, see the difference there? I've gone too far with that. If I scale it back a little bit, but it gives you really fine control over how you can adjust your images, right? In terms of tones. So curves is a very, very powerful tool, right? All right, so let's do a final before and after. You can also do before and after in Luminar with this little slider. Okay, so before and after. And I might go in and actually clone out some of these things on the horizon, right? Like I might go in and take this fence post out and some of these things over here and even this tree, because it doesn't really fit and just kind of distracting. But that's what I would do with our little giraffe here. So I hope that's helpful. Okay. He says the giraffe is on a slight rise. Do you still straighten the horizon, like equal moving the natural hill? To me, visually, I did what made sense to me visually. So I did straighten it, Linton, because it made more sense to my eyes. But I think that's sort of a judgment call based on your image. You decide. Okay. Yay, Gavin is sold on Luminar. Just so you can fix your giraffe, right? Because it's a great image. I mean, how often are you going to get back to Africa to photograph? I'm assuming this is an African safari. So how often are you going to get back there to photograph the giraffe? So yeah, absolutely. Rob's got a pun for you. Gavin gave in. Nice. All right, let's do a couple more. So I want to show you a few images here that are just sort of quick edits. And this is one of Stan's, right? So we want to show our Fearless Leaders image here. Stan is the one that helped me organize this event. So thank you, Stan. And all I wanted to show you here is couple of quick fixes that we've already talked about. Okay, so using the camera profile standard, I could change that. But what I want to do is that double click on the whites and the blacks. I'm going to increase the exposure a little bit. So one thing I haven't mentioned is exposure is actually for the midtones. Okay, so when I hover my mouse over the middle section of the histogram, can you see that it sort of grays out? Right, but when I do that and I grab it from the histogram in the middle, look what slider is affected. Okay, it's the exposure. Okay, so exposure is actually midtones. Okay, highlights are this area. Okay, so that's going to drag down like the blues in the sky. So I'm going to bring the highlights down a little bit. Right, so you may not have known that you can adjust your sliders from the histogram. Okay, so I'm just clicking and dragging right on the histogram. So now I'm going to go back here and make sure I have some black. So I'm holding that Alt key again, and I'm making sure I haven't gone too far with the whites. I don't want that ocean to clip. And I'm going to warm it up a little bit. Okay, I'm going to start with daylight as the preset because the beach looks really sort of blue. I find that daylight is a good reset, but it's often too magenta. So I'll dial the magenta down to about 4 and maybe give it a little more yellow. Okay, now you'll notice that I'm not grabbing the sliders here, right? I'm putting the mouse over the actual number and then clicking and dragging. And you see that I get this little hand. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, see there's a little hand with a little thing that goes like this. And what it does is it just goes slower. Okay, so as I drag it up, right, you can see that it is pulling to the right versus if I grab the slider, see how fast it goes. Okay. Here, I just have more control slowly. Okay. So really quickly, dark image, and I punch that up. Okay. Now I actually might even not go so far with the exposure. So notice here, I've only gone to 0.65, and I'm going to do a reset on this image and just show you what happens if I don't adjust the whites first. If I just go with exposure and try and fix it. Okay. Now I'm at almost +2, and I'm now blowing out the highlights. Okay. So the whole histogram has been pushed over. Okay. Versus when I do it the other way, I get more control and it's now in the middle. Okay. So watch your exposure. When you're shooting, let's see, do I know aperture priority? Okay. Watch your exposure in terms of, are you plus or minus exposure here? Are you using any exposure compensation? Right? Because if you are, come on, Lightroom. Come on, Lightroom. Where's my side panel? My side panel is missing. Nothing. It's empty. There we go. Okay. Aperture priority. So you're on 0, which is interesting because I'm not sure why you would get an underexposed image in aperture priority. That's actually really odd. So double check why you're getting an image that's almost 2 stops underexposed. Ah, I know exactly why. Okay. See this thing here, Stan? Okay, do you know what that means where it says spot, right? So spot means that's the metering mode that you've used. So my guess is what happened is where you placed your spot was somewhere bright. Okay, so I almost never use spot metering for this reason, because if you placed it somewhere bright or it hit the bright water here, it's going to set that thing for medium gray. Right? If it had hit the chairs, right, which is where you should have been focusing, right, it's going to actually overexpose to make them medium gray. So in a situation like this, use your matrix or average metering. Rob, if you could please share an article on why my snow is gray, because that talks about reading the histogram and why you want to make sure that you're actually need to do an article on metering. So thanks, Dan. You've reminded me to write an article on metering. Maybe I'll even write that one this week. Okay. Okay, so that's why that one was a little underexposed. I'm going to see if it's crooked. I'm just going to try auto here. Okay, so it did do a little fix. I'm going to double check it. Okay, because the horizon. So notice that the water, I could go to there, but I just want to go farther because it's more accurate. And I'm looking at that same spot where the land ends. Right. So I'm straightening it up, and I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm just going to go freeform, a little bit less on the bottom. And I would normally want to crop some from the left, but I don't want to lose that shadow. I do like the shadow, so I'm going to leave it there. let's just get rid of that blue thing on the left there. Okay. So what I was seeing there was like a little foot or something. Okay. So always check the edges of your images because that's where you're going to find things that are out of whack. Okay. Luminance. I'm going to do quick tip on lower of the blues here using the luminance sliders. Okay. So look what big difference I made on the sky there. Okay. And let's say I want to increase this a little bit. So the sand and the chairs have a lot of orange and yellow, right? Just like that. And I might just give it a bit more clarity and a little bit of texture and call it a day. Okay, so image that was very dark, I've just brightened it up and punched up the contrast while still maintaining the sky detail. Okay. So that was a quick edit. Okay, now Stan wanted me to remove the hand and this other one, but I'm actually going to leave this one with you, Stan, because actually let's do it quickly. I did a quick version of it in with the horse in Photoshop, but let's try this one in Luminar and see how good a job it does. All right. Here, I wanted to mention, you want to look at your settings as well. So you're using aperture, priority, and spot again. And now this one is overexposed. Okay, so that's that challenge with that spot metering. So go check your camera right now, Stan, and get off spot metering. I rarely, if ever, use that mode, honestly. Okay, so that's why this is overexposed, because you probably maybe hit her face and it's exposed for her face and it's overexposed like the rest of the image. Okay, so I'm going to bring that down a little bit. So we've got the highlights. I'm going to try that daylight again. A little bit less pink, a little bit less magenta, a little more yellow. Okay, so now we've got a color correction. We've got the highlights. We can bring the blues down again. Okay, so I know that's going to be aqua and blue. Let's not go so far. So remember I said the adjustments yellow, red, and orange, right? So if I bring orange up, see how that's affecting her face? Right? So I can really quickly lighten her face using that. But I'm going to show you how Lightroom does that, or Luminar does that as well. Okay. That's pretty good. All right, let's see if I can lower this. I don't know what color. Yeah, see, that's orange and yellow. So if I lower that, it's going to affect her face. And that's something that bothers me in Lightroom is I can't use that tool. I can't use this tool as a local adjustment. I can't apply it only to part of the image, right? Whereas I can in Luminar. So I'm going to take this over to Luminar. And I'm just going to go from here. Now, I would normally take a TIFF, but for the speed and purposes here, I'm just going to do a JPEG because it works a little bit quicker, right? So I'm opening it as the plugin version. Okay, so I'm just going to close the standalone version and go back over here to Lightroom. Oh, it is opening. Okay, let's see if we have any questions. Okay, Ron says, that explains some of my shots spot metering. Yeah, if you find that your exposures are all over the place, first of all, make sure to check that you're not on bracketing, because if you're bracketing, you get one dark, one light. Second of all, check for spot metering, all right? We've got another article on what happens when your camera's possessed. Maybe share that one as well, Rob. Okay, I think I've got this open in Luminar. It is on the other screen, so I'll just move that over. Okay, so again, I'm just going to do this enhance. We can do the sky enhancer, see how that affects the sky. You've got some spots in your sky up here, Stan, so you've got some blobs, looks like some spots on your sensor. This one could be spots on your lens, actually, because you shot this one at f11. I generally, like, my next question would be, why would you want to shoot at f11? If you shoot something wider open, you'll get this background more to focus, right? Also, you want space in front of her. So all the things we've talked about, you want to keep those in mind. But I wanted to try this erase tool and see how it does, not only on the hand, but we'll see to these spots as well. All right, so okay, so I'm just gonna make it, let me turn this green thing off again. All right, so I'm just gonna do I'm using my square bracket keys on my keyboard to make the brush smaller, right? I'm not just magically doing that. I find that you want to do a few spots at a time. Don't do them all. Do the erase and then see how it does, because you can undo the steps of the erase tool until you click and close it. Okay, once you close it, you can't undo it. You can only undo all of it. Okay, so what I'm doing is just trying to get all these little spots in the sky here. Right? And then I'm going to go do the hand. Okay. So once I'm happy with those, yep, that looks good. Okay, so I might even do the logo on her jacket. We can even take that out if you want. So if you've got logos or bright things, right, you can just clone those out. And the erase tool is very much like the content aware fill in Photoshop. Okay, so I have no idea how a job this is going to do here, but I find that you want to paint. Okay, so see where the red is painted? You want to go around the thing you want to erase a little bit, because it needs to see what to fill it with. Okay, if that makes sense. Now I'm going to click erase, and I'm going to cross my fingers, and let's see what it does. Okay. And that's not bad. You know, I mean, it's not perfect, but if we zoom out, are we going to notice that? Probably not as much as the giant hand, right? Right? I think we could get away with that. Okay. So that did a really nice job. So back to the HSL panel, right? So before I wanted to lower the luminance of the sky, right? So I could do that. But I also wanted to lower the orange, right, and the yellow, because it did lower these rocks and things, but it applied to her face. Okay, so I don't want to apply it to her face. So notice that it is darkening her. Okay, so I don't want to darken her. Let's just see. Let's brighten the trees up a little bit. Okay, I want to just lower those things. So I'm going to use that mask tool and just quickly erase it from her. Okay, so I make sure that it's applying everywhere except her face. Now, mind you, if I darken her arms, I could actually put that back, right? Because her arms have got lots of highlights, and we could actually let it work there. So we'll darken her arms a little bit. Look at her shoes as well. Maybe we could darken the pink on the shoes or lessen the saturation on the shoes, right? But keep in mind, it's not applying to her face. So just like that. All right. Now, this is where the magic comes. I didn't get a lot of portraits from the group today, but I want to show you this one, and I'm crossing my fingers that it's going to work. So Luminar does analysis, and it finds the face. So look what happens when I do this. Face light. Okay, it's like I just dodged or put a filter or flash on her face. Okay, how great is that? Now, I'm not going to do any of the other editing here because we don't really see her front on, but I think that's done a really good job. I do want to show you that super contrast and how I can use that to control the highlights. Okay, so darkening, right, to the right. And look what it's doing to these highlights. Okay, now keep in mind that if I only want it to apply to this rock here, I can certainly mask that in. Okay, so look what a great job it's doing on the rock. So that's the only place that I want this. I don't want to make the sky look too fake. Okay. So look at what a nice job that did on the rock. Okay. And maybe I want to do that over here as well. Okay. And let's do a little bit over here and ever so slightly on her arms. Right. Because I'm trying to get the attention on her face. Right. So see what that's doing? Look at that. Right. Okay, once that catches up, I'm going to apply that, and then it's going to take me back into Lightroom. Okay. I'm melting again. All right, let me go back to Lightroom. And we should see, and there's the finished image. Okay, so I would probably crop this one as well because there's lots of space behind her. But look at the difference, the rock, the shoes, the arms, the sky. We got rid of the spots, okay, quickly. So yeah, I can't help myself. I would probably make this one a square, Stan. There we go. Right. Something else. Okay, I'm just going to duplicate this one real quick. So this is what's called a virtual copy in Lightroom. I'm going to show you a little trick here. And I'm just going to flip this guy. Right. So when you're looking to the left, or when your subject is looking to the left, in our society in North America, we read from left to right, top to bottom, okay? And when you're looking to the left, it's kind of like you're looking back or thinking back. So it's like pondering your past, okay? When you are looking to the right, it's like looking forward. Okay, so it's a very subliminal change, but just keep that in mind. And in an image like this, you could actually do them either way, okay? Rob is reminding me to check my thing. Gavin is how you pronounce his name. My pardons, Gavin. Okay. My apologies. So, Gavin, I will pronounce your name correctly from now on. Thank you for that, Rob. But still, Gavin gave in, and he's buying Luminar. So, even funnier pun. All right. Let's continue. So I've only got a couple more I want to show you. A few that I didn't edit. Mostly I chose because people sent in a couple of images and I wanted to give everybody a chance. So I only did one image from everybody. I did the other one of Lois. And Barry's images, I wasn't really sure what to do with them. To be honest, there's not really a lot I can do with an image like this. I found that what I would do with this one would literally just be make it more of a silhouette. I would straighten it out because it was crooked and maybe crop it a little, right? So something like that. So there's not a whole ton that can be done with this image. Also, it's a JPEG, so I don't have a lot of data there, right? Same thing with this one here. This came to me as a black and white. Let me just reset it. Okay, so this came to me as a black and white with a Fuji color profile, and you can see that it's sort of abstract, and there's not, this front ball is the one that's in focus here. So I'm not really sure where to go with this one either. I might make it somewhat abstract and try and play with the contrast in the balls here and go with the black and white, maybe even enhance that. And I think because it's applied the Fuji filter, remember I said go Adobe monochrome, right? Watch what happens when I have when I go back here to the Fuji one. So this is a Fuji filter that would have been applied in camera, right? I don't have the black and white settings, okay, because it's monochrome. So that means that the image itself has had the color removed. But when I use the Adobe monochrome, so that's a great version here, I can try and play with the colors a little bit. But I think the original, there's really not a lot of color here. So again, I'm not really sure where I can go with this image other than, you know, do something like that abstract, right? This one from Lynn, it was the only one she sent. And I wanted to mention it because it's that same problem again. Autofocus images or unsharp images, it's a common occurrence, especially if you are new to photography. And what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for anything sharp in the image, and I don't see anything sharp, and there's kind of a double image of some of the grass and so on. And this is mostly caused here because of the shutter speed. Okay, so the shutter speed at 1/5 of a second is simply too slow. Okay, so aperture priority, and she chose f7, which is fine. But in this case, you would need a higher ISO because you want to make sure that your shutter speed is 1 over the focal length, or in this case, 48 millimeters. You need a faster shutter speed if you're hand holding. Okay, if you use the tripod, Lynn, you want to make sure that you're using a remote control because there's still some movement and shake here. All right. So maybe the last thing you want to share with this one, Rob, is shutter speed article, freezing and blurring subjects. And I have one final image that I wanted to do. I've got Gail's and Kathleen's. So let's do a quick one on Kathleen's. She wanted tone control as well. And I did a little bit of work on this one, I think, already. And so I pulled the highlights down. I'll just reset it to show you what I did here. So the image itself is very contrasty, but because it's a raw file, there's lots of data. So I'm pulling this down to make sure that I have detail in the highlights. And then I'm going to pull it up and bring that up into the shadows. And I would probably go even farther because I don't want to go too far that it starts to look sort of muddy. So one of the things that drives me crazy with people that do like faux HDR. Okay, so I'm going to show you something that makes faux HDR. This is probably a bad example for this one because it's already fairly not contrasty. Faux HDR, where did that image go now? There we go. Is when you go over the top and it starts to look like really, really like this and something like this. Okay, so please do me a favor and don't make things like this. To me, this is what I call neon puke, and my eyes hurt when I see color like this. Okay, so tone control is about keeping the details where you want them. Okay, so when I dial down the highlights here, okay, you'll see that there's nothing clipping anymore. I also lowered the exposure. Okay, now I have two options. I could keep the exposure where it is and the rocks are exposed nicely, but the water is still overexposed. Not too bad. Or I can lower the exposure a little bit, right? Like so. I want to make sure to keep some blacks, right? Let's keep some whites. And then I can start to use radial filters. Okay, so I use those radial filters that I used on the bird a lot. Okay, so I'm just going to draw one here, double click, and bring the highlights down even more. So if your highlight slider isn't doing enough, okay, you can do a adjustment, a local adjustment, either with the brush or with a radial filter like this to bring the highlights down even more. And I'm going to enhance the texture and the clarity to bring out that water. Okay. Now I can also right click on it and duplicate it. Okay, so it takes it even farther. So now look at that water. Okay, let me just turn off the radial filter. So see what that's doing. Okay, I can duplicate it one more time. And I'm actually going to make it up here in the sky because I want to bring the highlights down in the sky, but not the texture. So I want the highlights up here darkened, like so. Right. And then if I wanted to bring out some detail in this rock, I could actually do the opposite. Okay, so I could increase the exposure here. Okay, maybe even bring it over because part of the waterfall is in the sun and part is not. Right, so I can kind of brighten up the part that's not and bring your eye there. So all the things that I'm doing here are about tone control and drawing the eye in to where you want them to look, your viewer to look. Right. The other thing I'm going to add is a vignette, and I'm just doing that with a quick preset here. And this is in my Lightroom set of presets. So one more thing for you to share. Rob is busy sharing articles and things in the chat for you. Right. You'll see that's the article on freezing and blurring. So that's the minimum shutter speed. And I do have a set of Lightroom presets for those of you that use Lightroom. Right. I'm going to do a flip on this one like I did on the last image. Okay, because again, I want the water sort of flowing left to right. And I'm going to take a little bit off this side because the waterfall is dead smack in the middle again. So I want it off-centered. Keep the rock on the left as sort of a nice base. And I like it flowing into this position here. Okay, so the composition is really nice. It's now framing the waterfall. I might even go a little darker on my vignette. And let's warm the image up a little bit, like so. Okay, so there's the before, really bright and contrasty. But when you shoot a raw file, okay, you get lots and lots of detail. I'm going to go in here to lens corrections because I think I'm seeing some chromatic aberration here. So I'm just going to check that off. And yes, I did. Okay, so when I choose profile correction, it also finds that if your lens is known, okay, it's chosen the correct lens, which it was. That's the right lens. And where I'm looking at, I'm just going to zoom into 200% here. I saw a tiny sort of blue fringe or green fringe at the top of the mountain here. Let me just turn this profile off, or the chromatic aberration off. Do you see that blue fringe there? And over here, there's a little purple fringe. Okay, so when I check that off, now it's gone. Okay, so I would apply chromatic aberration on pretty much every image that I do, right? Okay, so yes, we have gone way over time today. Let me come over here. How's everybody doing? Troopers, excellent. Please give the video a thumbs up, as Rob has said. Subscribe to my channel. And as we mentioned earlier, we do this every week. So if you join in using the link that you got to this video today, which is youtube.com/digital photo mentor/live, every Wednesday at this time, I have a new one of these videos. So it might not be your images, but there's value in watching me edit other people's images because there's always something to learn, right? So I'd love to hear what you learned today. And Holly's off to go watch the end of the Stanley Cup. Awesome. Well, the Oilers from Edmonton are not in it this year, so I'm not watching the hockey game. But you enjoy and take care, everybody, until next time. Have a great weekend. Radial filters, excellent, Ron. Tell me what else you are learning in the chat. And until next week, please remember to submit images. If you want to participate, even not as your camera club, you can send your own images anytime, and that's in the description below the video as well. So thank you so much for participating. MA, thank you as well. And I hope you enjoy. And take care. Now for some AC.